The origin of Badhran Patens has always been a subject of contention. Some stories claim he was a street urchin, spending his days performing a song or perhaps a lively dance for coin from the entertained passerbys, honing his skills of stealth and pickpocket, and preying on misfortunate tavern-goers who may have overindulged. A totally paradoxical theory is that he was of royal blood, born a prince or perhaps a bastard son of the member of the High Court. Where else would he learn such mastery of the arts? Surely it would take years of formal training to become so adept with various instruments, any instrument, across the land, that they were said to become an extension of his very being. His storytelling is so engaging. It was said to pull all who listened into what can be described as a trance, not much different than the mesmerizing spells cast by only the most powerful of enchanters. In this version of his origin, he was said to leave the royal court, bored with the monotony of such a propitious life. This is where the stories come into accord. There is no doubt, whether by choice or necessity, Badhran Patens joined an ancient order of the Rogue Guild. This is where he learned the art of swordplay, becoming a master with the short sword, rapier, and dagger. Combine this with his virtuosity in song, dance, and the spoken word, Badhran Patens had a likeness the world had yet to see. One of the favorite accounts and the most frequently spoken of all his exploits is the tale of the kobolds and the king. When men were just a fledgling race on this planet, there was a young king named Gandriel, whose lands were being tormented by a clan of kobolds living within the hillside surrounding his keep. Gandriel sent parties of his best soldiers into the hills in an attempt to rid them of this scourge upon their land. None of them ever returned. Gandriel then sent out his best scouts to spread the word across the nearby lands. Any group brave enough to vanquish these vile creatures from his land would receive as a bounty 1/2 of the contents of the royal coffers. This attracted sellswords of all shapes and sizes, and eventually, Badhran Patens. When Gandriel granted him an audience, he mocked Badhran, suggesting that perhaps life as the jester of his court would be more suiting. To his amazement, this did not offend Badhran. He simply tapped on the ocarina hanging around his neck and thanked the king for his time, tucked his mridangam under his arm, and made his way to the city gates. Leaving the city gates, he began to beat his drum in a violent rhythm. The guards, watching him fade into the distance, remarked that his feet did not appear to be touching the ground beneath him, as he sped away faster than any steed they had ever seen. Badhran Patens, upon finding the entrance to the kobold caves, sped through the winding serpentine tunnels, beating his drum and emitting such a sickly sweet melody from his ocarina that each note he struck increased the kobolds' fury. As the kobolds gave chase, Badhran led them closer and closer to the exit, gathering them one by one. The kobold clan now worked into a furor, pursued Badhran and his infernal din, choking on the cloud of dust he left behind. Witnesses claimed that from the city walls, the kobolds exiting their lair in pursuit of Badhran looked like a giant worm slinking its way through the hillside. As the sun shone through the trees, some claimed the notes Badhran played on his ocarina were visible. creating glints of light like hundreds of candle flies, all flying in unison. What happened next was truly a thing of legend. As he weaved his way higher and higher into the mountainside, it appeared that Badhran was going to be trapped. The kobolds followed closely behind him, and the sheer cliff of the mountain above him grew closer and closer with every step. Upon reaching the apex of the mountain, Badhran simply stopped. He ceased beating his drum. He began playing his ocarina with a speed and magnitude so great it could be heard across the valley below. His feet moving in place to the rhythm he was creating. The kobolds, as they approached, now worked into a death frenzy, began leaping from the mountaintop to certain death upon the rocks below. The faster he played, the faster they leapt until there was but one kobold remaining. The Kobold King. Badhran simultaneously stopped playing his ocarina, unsheathed his rapier, and is said to have whispered, "Pianissimo." For a brief, fleeting moment, the Kobold King, no longer entranced with fury, realized the magnitude of what had just happened. His eyes widened, his teeth bared, and Badhran drove his rapier up from under the kobold's jaw through the tooth and bone until his blade protruded from the top of the massive beast's skull. Badhran rested and sheathed his blade before the kobold's now lifeless body hit the ground to lay like a common hound at his master's feet. It was with a wry grin that Badhran used his boot heel to roll the corpse of the once fearsome Kobold King over the edge, depositing him on the rocks below amongst the rest of his brethren. From this point forward, Badhran Patens was known by many names and faces, but he will always be known as the Bard.